of everything.
Okay, we're here today with Piers Corbyn, brother of the Labour leader. He's famous for being a weather activist or weather analyst, long-range weather forecaster. And also, he's also famous as what they call a climate change denier, and he protested against Extinction Rebellion. We've got someone from Extinction Rebellion here, not an official representative, but someone who's with who was associated. We've got many other people here who've got, will no doubt have questions, ideas, and issues that they can raise. And also, because it's being broadcast on YouTube, anyone who's watching this discussion can participate by looking up material, raising questions online, and then perhaps we can follow that up later on by analysing whether those things are right or not, and people can assess for themselves what the data, evidence, ideas are, and we can progress this in future discussions. So at the moment, I'll just give a little bit of, I'll do a sort of pretend interview with Piers because we know each other. My own position, just to make clear, I'm not convinced by the argument of man-made climate change either being dangerous in and of itself, or this sort of, universal extinction emergency thing. I don't agree with that. But I have never accepted the idea that that's totally incorrect. So I'm sort of ambivalent on the question. But I've known Piers quite a long time, and whenever I've discussed the questions with him, I think he's provided serious answers to questions that I posed, which when I went and checked up, they did check out. So that's where I'm coming from. Over to Piers, effectively. How long have you been studying the climate?
Since I was 5 years old.
5 years old. Okay. What got you into it?
Well, my dad said, look, this is all science up there and it's all happening. And, I was always interested in the sun and the weather. And when I was a teenager, I made a weather station and, reported on that to the nearby airfield and then went to Imperial College and did physics and theoretical physics.
Okay, in your view, what drives climate?
The sun.
Meaning what?
So, the driver of the climate, the provision of heat is from the sun, and the efficiency of the heat transfer and the interactions of the sun and the earth are controlled mainly by the solar wind, which is the rush of particles from the sun, which is generated by what's called solar activity.
Anyone want to cross-question that? Anyone want to cross-question what he just said?
Okay. Sorry, Dr. Corbyn, can you tell us what your PhD? Oh, you're not. You don't have
doctor.
PhD.
Next to your mouth.
Sorry. Okay, got it. Okay. Okay. So in Imperial, you've got a degree in physics.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You could have just called.
Do you want? Yeah, that's right.
Say what I have got. Okay. I got a Royal Scholarship to Imperial College in 1965. I wrote some scientific papers when I was still 17, 3 scientific papers, and I got a first-class degree in physics and then got an MSc in astrophysics, and have had more scientific papers published since the ones when I was a teenager.
Okay, when they say the consensus opinion amongst scientists is that climate change is man-made, what's your answer to that?
It's bullshit.
What's your answer? That's
well, okay. In one word, that's what I would say. The answer is that is not true. There isn't a consensus of any meaning. The so-called scientific paper which reported what they claim was a consensus, it was a list of papers where people had published measurements of like the speed of snails under extra CO2 and got money from global warming foundations, etc. But they did not say in their studies that they believed that CO2 was causing changes in climate. At the most, 3% of those studies did say that. The rest said nothing at all. Recently, there's been a petition signed in America by 30,000 graduates of science and engineering who say they do not see evidence for man-made climate change.
Okay, but taking that to one side,
It's not a
does
question
it
of opinion.
does it matter whether 99.9% of scientists say climate change is man-made?
No, it does not matter, because at the time of Galileo, for example, 101% of scientists were against Galileo, but it turned out he was right.
Okay. Gentlemen here, what did you want to say?
No, what I wanted to say was the big oil companies have a tremendous interest in claiming that that climate change is not happening as a result of what their activities are. If the stories of climate change were bogus, why was it that they haven't actually put up a tremendous opposition to the whole idea is that it is man-made?
Do you want to say that louder, what he said?
Yes.
Just talk to the audience rather than to Mike. Talk to the audience.
What he says is that how come the oil companies have not been more opposed to things like Extinction Rebellion or whatever? Well, my answer to that is actually the oil companies are making money hand over fist out of the climate change story. ExxonMobil are on the committee of Citizens Online, where the Extinction Rebellion event was hatched via a Gail Bradbrook. The reason why they can make money is because they made agreements to support the climate change story, providing there was a uniform price for carbon across the board. Now that meant that the increase of pay that farmers have to receive for burning food, like burning maize, they've got to be paid more than they could by selling it as food, put up the price of energy. So basically the oil companies have doubled profits on 98% of world energy and given away 2% of world energy, or possibly 4%, to various so-called sustainable operations. Now, I know directly that all this is true because I can tell you the story of what happened in 2004, and I'll be as brief as possible. But I was invited to the Global Oil Summit in Houston, Texas, to give a report. And I told them its climate is controlled by the sun, and they were very interested. And this was a meeting of all the top oil companies, Putin's chief scientific advisor, and the American military, right? It was 100 people tops there. And when I'd finished speaking, a guy walks up to me and he flashes a wad of papers. He said, "Mr. Corbyn, I just want to tell you that we're on the case." And he showed me graphs of the solar activity and rising temperatures of the sun or whatever due to the sun. And I said, well, that's a bit like what I've got. So why have you got me here? He said, we wanted to hear from a real scientist in the field practicing now independent of us. So we got you. I said, well, that's nice. And then I said, and who are you? He said, I'm the chief executive of ExxonMobil. Right? Now, 2 months after that, or 1 month after that, friends of mine said, why don't we ask these people, oil companies, for money? I said, look, I don't want to do that. But they said, look, tell you what, ask them for money and ask the IPCC, United Nations. So you've got like even balance, so we could be independent. They were asked for money and they said no. We like what Mr. Corbyn said, but we do not want to upset the green lobby. I'll repeat that. We do not want to upset the green lobby. So in 2004, a meeting of all the oil companies together decided, one, they knew what's true, i.e. the sun does it, two, how to make money. And it's a no-brainer, they're going to go for how to make money, and they've gone on there 24/7 along with it. They don't mind being blamed for everything, so long as the story stays in place.
Okay, 1 minute. But the fact that people are financing one view, it's also true that Donald Trump, for example, and others have got financiers back in the opposite view. So there are interests involved in both arguments. I mean, whether that's factual or not is irrelevant, but there are interests back in both arguments.
Of course. Generally speaking, oil companies or big corporations invest on both sides in American politics, for example, so they can always have a say. But I'm telling you what actually happened at that meeting. And I know from all scientific evidence that climate change is entirely controlled by the sun, and carbon dioxide levels are an effect, not a cause of climate.
Do you want to clarify what
I
you mean
will.
by that?
When the sea gets warmer, it emits more CO2. When it's colder, it can absorb more. It's like when you have a bottle of pop, you warm it up just a little bit and little bubbles will form. Those are carbon dioxide, they're coming off. Even water will do the same thing. Carbon dioxide comes off. So there's a dynamic equilibrium between what's in the air and what's in the sea. There's 50 times more carbon dioxide dissolved in the sea than there is in air. And when the sea warms up, CO2 comes off. But there's a delayed process because the circulation of the sea is very complicated and slow, and it takes even 500 or 800 years for the effects to come out. But they do happen. The rise in CO2 levels now is probably due to the medieval warm period.
What is the medieval warm period, and why is it important in the discussion?
The medieval warm period is a warm period in medieval times like 700 AD to 1300, which was of great prosperity in Europe due to bigger crops and a general warming. It's significant in the debate because the Climate Research Unit of East Anglia tried to hide the medieval warm period some years ago, and the Climate Gate, as they're called, emails revealed the dirty tricks they were up to.
What sort of temperature difference was there between now and the medieval warm period? Was it warmer then than now?
Definitely, it was warmer then than now, yes. 1 or 2 degrees in the temperate regions, possibly 2 or 3 degrees in temperate regions, but more like 1 or 2. The world as a whole will be half or 1 degree warmer, but the key thing about this changing climate is it's all controlled by the jet stream, and that is controlled by solar activity. And the biggest changes in temperature and weather systems happen in the temperate regions, North Hemisphere and South Hemisphere.
Is there evidence that you can point to that shows the lag between rising temperatures caused by the sun and CO2 increases?
Yes. The ice core data sets of the end of the last ice age and the ice age before, for example, show that when the seas warmed up, CO2 levels went up 800 years or 600 years or so later. Now, the experts in the climate field, namely Joanna Haigh is one of them from Imperial College, admitted in a public meeting that Piers is right on that. But she says what happens is extra CO2 comes off and then causes warming. Now, because that is an assumption, because actually it isn't true, because again, the peak of that CO2 is after the peak of warming. So the extra peak, as he calls it, doesn't cause any warming. I repeat, CO2 is is caused by an effect of, a result of changes in climate, not a cause of it.
Okay, open up to the floor. What would you like to say first of all?
Could I hold? Yeah. Can I just speak? Yeah. So yeah, I want to give a comment about I want to give my comment about my experience of Extinction Rebellion. So a cultural backdrop. I'm involved with rainbow gathering culture, which is about back to the land. I think Greenpeace was established at the first rainbow gathering. So I've given 20 years of my life to furthering that culture. So a friend of mine was at the last rainbow gathering in Sussex. A friend of mine was at the last rainbow gathering in Sussex, where very often in the rainbow gatherings in the UK we get harassment from the external authorities. So last autumn the army came and took down. This is an off-grid gathering, so we're cooking on open fires, we're eating in circle, we're fetching water from the springs, and we're singing to each other, and we're re-establishing roots of community. And the army came and took down our kitchen, hid our pots, and poured water on our sacred fires. A friend of mine was not happy, and he'd heard about Extinction Rebellion, so we did a walk from the Ashdown Forest. I only did one day, but he did all the days to London to join the first Extinction Rebellion warm-up, if you like, a workshop on non-violent direct action. So I then came in, and for me, like the rainbow thread from all intents and purposes that come to London. So I'm going to get involved on a periphery to observe Extinction Rebellion and see how it's operating. So I was on the 5 bridges, and I did the swarming initially to disrupt traffic. And then a week later, I was going to come for what my friends had said. There was going to be a debriefing. So I was sleeping in the park, as I do, and I was up early. I was there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they'd had a bit of a party. And so there was no one particularly to clean up the office. We had to vacate one office. There were 2 rooms, so we had to vacate one. I spent about 6 hours with one other person, tidying up all the bags and sorting them out for them to go back to the warehouse, waiting for the debrief. And then when it came to it, having cleared the space for the debrief, we were told the debrief is only for administrators rather than for foot soldiers. So for me, this is a little bit the story of Extinction Rebellion. And I agree that the status quo has to change, but I'm concerned about the messaging. I arrived with a setup here, and I see a lot of people from my culture who are used to volunteer labour for setting up off-grid catering. And the advertisement was that we would be doing direct action for 2 weeks. I donated 60 hours of my time. I brought my children on the walk into London. I brought my children and other people's children into London to see, how potentially the status quo can be challenged. But then I find that after putting in service at Parliament Square, there was no kitchen coordinator. I couldn't phone anyone at Waterloo Bridge. I couldn't phone anyone at the different places. I had to go via the centre. Yeah, and this is, for me, the problem. And when they said, oh yeah, we're going to stop the direct action, we're going to negotiate with the mayor and the police force, if, as they advertise, that it's holocentric, that it's horizontal organisation, there should have been a People's Assembly in every single site. It should have been well advertised to every corner, for example, of Parliament Square. That it should have been advertised, a People's Assembly in Parliament Square, a People's Assembly on Waterloo Bridge, a People's Assembly in Marble Arch, a People's Assembly in Oxford Circus. Then there should have been delegates from each People's Assembly to a General Assembly, and then they would have made the decision. My suspicion is that there was a very unadvertised meeting of a General Assembly just for a few coordinators. And my concern is that, yeah, they just want to see big corporation signalling that they're greening, and they're not concerned about redistribution of the land and getting back to more efficient ways of producing food and creating harmonious and peace-loving communities. Yeah.
One sec. Just so what I get from that, the question that comes up in my mind is the following. What's the distinction in your mind between the CO2 issue, greenhouse gases and so on, perhaps in yours as well, and campaigns, genuinely motivated campaigns by millions of people around the world around what really, I think, can be sort of merged with the idea of pollution? CO2 we don't know. We don't physically see that. But poisoning the sea, poisoning the land, poisoning the air, we see everywhere, right? So if you like, the merging of those two issues, how do you see that?
Yes, well, they are merged by the interest groups, the big corporations, in order to confuse people, because the CO2 story is very helpful. In fact, the CO2 is the gas of life. It's not bad at all. And when you breathe out, the CO2 concentration in your breath is 100 times the average in the air. Now, I support what I would call true green policies, i.e. genuine defence of biodiversity, looking after hedgerows and not using insecticides as much as possible, and so forth. However, the CO2 story actually is causing damage, in particular the policies. For example, last year in Germany, over 1,000 tonnes of insects were killed by wind farms. A lot of those insects are pollinators. So that set back crop growth, and it does in every country.
Are you saying wind farms are negative, and why?
Wind farms actually produce more CO2 in their total circuit of production because of the high cost of the steel, etc. And they're also extremely inefficient, and as a consequence, every wind farm has to have a coal-fired or oil-fired or something station to back it up when the wind doesn't blow. They're there as symbols and money-making ventures, as are all the things which come out in the name of Big Green. Another example is the Draxby power station. That's now run on wood chips. Coal mines are closed and the wood chips are bought from America. Forests are being destroyed and put on ships, made into wood pellets and burnt. And they're burnt in Draxby, and they produce, because it's quite low temperature, they produce microparticle pollution, which is equivalent to increasing the number of diesel vehicles on the road in the United Kingdom by 25%. And we're told this is saving the planet. It's causing people ill. And if I give one more example, which is really very important, the biggest victims of climate change policy are black African women, who, because of the lack of power stations in Africa, held back by green policies, where they're told they've got to use wind and solar or something, women cook over open fires. Now, it's okay doing that for a day, but if you do it 24/7 for years, you get ill and you die young. The World Health Organization estimate that 6 million people a year die of what they generally call fuel poverty. This is an example. So it also means that climate change policy, as put forward by the United Nations, is racist. Racist because it is killing black African women in huge numbers.
Okay, gentlemen here. Question or contribution?
No question. No, it's answering some of the points which you made. I think that I'm the only fellow scientist here, and the issue is, I'm not going to pretend to be as qualified as you, Doctor. I'm just a lowly physics teacher. Okay. The first issue is that different gases have different rates of absorption, reflection, and transmission. Carbon dioxide and methane have higher rates of reflection than other gases like nitrogen and oxygen. So, that's one issue. The other issue is what you mentioned about wind farms. Sorry. Okay. Wind farms. Sorry. Okay. Wind farms can economically compete with most other ways of producing electricity. It can even compete with coal. Coal is cheaper in general, but it can compete cost effectively with wind farm. But there is an issue that the wind doesn't blow when you want the electricity. So you'll always need other means.
If the wind farm's blowing 24/7,
yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
But you see, they can't.
They can't. Yeah. So you will always need other, but they can contribute. Okay. What was the last thing which you mentioned? I wanted to answer. Oh yeah, about burning wood.
Draxby power station. Yeah.
Okay. The issue about microparticles is that there are methods of removing that. Using electrostatic. So you can remove the particles these days.
Well,
Let's go.
No, my question is to you. I saw one of your videos.
No, not to me.
Oh, to you. Okay.
sorry, what? Yeah. Oh, okay. The issue of microparticles, that is important. There is an issue of cost of how much you remove. Currently in Draxby, the pollution is, as I said. I think there is an issue, though, that maybe it's improvable, and I'm working on various researches to improve. I think the issue of microparticles from diesel engines, better catalytic converters could be made. There would be a cost, but they could be made. I don't think diesel is automatically going to be as polluting as it is now. But right now, it is seriously polluting.
You talked about the fourth revolution, and there is a summit next year in Japan somewhere. I saw your video. If you put some more information, so we all can learn a bit more, because your video was very short and said the fourth wave of industrial revolution, and they're meeting, and they want us to pay, not the private. If you add on to it, please.
Actually, what I'll do on that is just at this point in the video, when it's online, I'll post material on there that deals with that, because it's not me, the focus of this discussion here, yeah?
Yeah. Could, yeah. When I was walking up the River Wye, I've been involved in fracking awareness campaigns, and when I was walking up the River Wye, I encountered the Monmouth Group, and they were lobbying the government for a regional grid. And basically their premise was, if you get off the national grid, then you no longer need to be dependent on big corporations, but you can get big business involved in regional grids. And then you can cut it down to, within that regional grid, you can have town grids, and then small business can get involved. And once you get down to small business, then you can use recycled materials to make your small wind turbines. And ultimately you have street grids, and each house can become a power generating facility as well as a power using facility. And you can use exactly the same principle for agriculture, that food doesn't need to go 4 times around the planet before it gets on your plate, that food should just travel, maximum a mile or so, and that you just import what you can't create, like luxury goods. And even those things like mangoes should be sun-dried, so there's less volume to transport, and that you don't need to refrigerate and use freezers for them. What do you think of that as a way forward?
I think all those things are great. They're all great. And the important thing to understand is the big corporations don't like that. And if you look at who's funding this, who's behind it, I mentioned already that ExxonMobil and 5G oligarchs are on the committee of Citizens Online, which spawned the Extinction Rebellion. And furthermore, Greta Thunberg is
Greta.
Thunderbird, all right, is managed by a certain Louisa Neubauer. She is funded and paid for by One.org, which is the pseudo-charity front organisation for George Soros and Bill Gates. So you know where their interests lie. They want big, big, big corporations, big, big, big projects, and they rake off the money. And the final understanding of what's really going on is made clear when you read the World Economic Forum latest green report. That says we've got to save the planet, and it's going to cost £1 trillion a year, and we've got to get this money from somewhere. The 71 biggest corporations in the world have got a lot of money locked away. We have to unlock it. Now, what does that mean? That means they want to rob your pension fund to fund giant projects. But will these giant projects cost what they say? I suggest not, because 1, they'll skim the top, and 2, they'll use the money to stop the impending bank crisis, which is overdue. This stuff is to work the world into a frenzy to save the worst aspects of corporate capital. And kids are being brought on board, and I use the word brainwashed because they get really upset, and grown-ups are being bullied by these kids' movements, if you like, a bit like what happened, in previous, dare I say, interwar activities. This is completely wrong. We have to have accountable science, open government, like our guy here is talking about, but anything Extinction Rebellion does, if it becomes radical, like grass movements, will be opposed, which is why the main demand of Extinction Rebellion is the government must heed us and take action to stop the climate crisis. Well, you cannot stop climate change, but when they want action, the government can spend lots of money, yes, and on your behalf will help rob the pension funds. That is what it's about.
Who here believes that no one should be allowed to deny climate change, whatever that means? Who here believes that? You believe that?
No, I think everybody should be able to voice their free opinion.
Right, but who believes that someone who doesn't believe in climate change or takes a position that Piers got... You believe he's wrong is another question. if you believe someone's wrong, it's one thing. But believe that it's wrong, that you shouldn't, for example, be able to broadcast anyone on television who opposes the idea that man-made climate change.
The only things I feel that way about is issues which are issues of life and death, like vaccine denial. Yeah, but he, sir, okay. I think he has the right to say what he does, so I and people like me can oppose it, because one of the issues, because he mentioned, I've opposed many things which he said in front of you, and another thing which, so for example, he mentioned the issue of chopping down trees to generate electricity, and I disagree with what he said. I think that process is carbon neutral, because the trees which are chopped down, new trees are grown, and younger trees absorb more CO2 than older trees.
When I was a kid and went to Malaysia where my father lives in the 1970s, the sky was clear blue every year. Clear blue every year. But now, if you go to Malaysia, it's cloudy all the time. And it's because Indonesian farmers are cutting down the jungles, burning them, and that creates, clouds that completely engulf Malaysia. And so one other thing I was going to say, first of all, which was, how do you feel? I mean, on the one side, you're saying it's fine for the counter-argument to be made, but is it fine, for example, for someone to turn around and say, as seems to be the mode at the moment, that we are in a desperate emergency, we've only got 12 years left, and you must conceive of this issue as if your house is on fire and Extinction Rebellion is the alarm signal? That's the argument. What do you think about that?
Yeah. The issue here is that I'm opposing his science. I'm not opposing his morals. Okay, so I'm not. Okay, and I've already opposed your science, and I've given you. Okay, I've given you some of my responses. Okay.
You can add more
okay.
Online.
Okay, but yeah, I know. I've made statements. First of all, what you mentioned about what's happening in Indonesia, those trees are chopped down for a different purpose. Those trees are chopped down to turn that into farmland. What we're talking about is when trees are grown specifically to burn to generate electricity, like trees like willow, which are fast growing. All right, that is carbon neutral. So, I know, but that's what I was referring to. Okay, okay. Yeah, I know. If those trees are grown specifically for fuel, then that process is carbon neutral because those trees will be replaced.
Yeah. Can you just ask a question? Hello. Yeah. My question is this: being a resident of Venice, we are routinely informed that there is a rising of the sea and Venice is going down under more and more. And there is a factor of speculations here because the houses and dwelling on the ground floor are cheaper and they don't create profits for all these real estate sharks. They tend to be disqualified or downgraded because obviously they make more profit selling first, second, third floor. And so I never really believed myself personally about the raising of the sea. Because, for example, in 1966, the sea level grew to 1.90 meters. 1.90 meters, and now these dams that they are building are only holding 2 meters. So we think, well, if there is a climate change, what's the point to put so much money in the dam that would only hold 2 meters? And in 1996, there was very little issues about climate change, but it reached 1.90 meters. It means that the people I mean, they thought if it keeps on like that, it's the end of Venice, which is under the patronage of UNESCO as artistic and unique city in the world and so forth. But personally, I have apartments on ground floor, and I'm not worried about climate change because I believe this issue of rising of the sea is a non-issue. There are interest involved of the real estate market, very profitable in Venice.
Okay, so how do you measure whether the sea levels are rising, and is it something negative if they are, and so on? This tell us about sea level.
Yeah. Sea level rise, yeah, it can be measured by large numbers of buoys, floating things around the world, and also what happens in ports. But at the same time, you have to allow for sinking of land in certain places. Venice is one such place where it is sinking. The measures of sea level rise show that there has been a slow sea level rise since the end of the last ice age, which is caused by expansion of the whole sea as it gets warmer. The rate of sea level rise did not change from before and after the Industrial Revolution. So there's no change in any to do with sea level, which is something to do with CO2. Al Gore, of course, knows this, and he's still got a very expensive house by the sea, despite the fact he's warning everybody to move away from the sea. And to our gentleman here, I would say, all I'm asking for is evidence-based science. We want actual scientific evidence of actual measurements in the real world of carbon dioxide levels and temperatures which show that carbon dioxide drives temperatures. Now, I know there is no such scientific paper in existence or even one scientist in the world that can justify that claim. Not one. Which is why they will never turn up. If they were serious, they would come to Parliament and explain the evidence. Instead, they send a young girl, right? So I ask this gentleman here to bring forward actual scientific paper evidence. We've asked the BBC, they've produced nothing.
So your brother's in a very influential position. Your brother's in a very influential position. Your brother is in a very influential position as the leader of the opposition. Does he agree with your stance on climate change?
My brother, well, he used to be my brother, now I'm his brother. He supports Labour policy.
That's not an answer. That's a politician's answer, and you're not a politician. Give us a real answer. Does he share your position?
What's his position?
I think
What-
given the circumstances, it is fair enough. Given the circumstances, I think it's fair enough to accept that answer, because we are in a political world, and what Piers says will immediately be taken up by somebody else. So if you want a secret expose about what Jeremy thinks or doesn't think, it's not fair to ask that now.
Look, Jeremy has minders and I have minders. And my advice to you is Jeremy supports Labour policy.
Okay, but you're saying if you can't convince your own brother, why should we listen to you?
Do you agree with your brother on everything? I mean, that's frankly a stupid argument.
He's not right.
Neither in or there, is it?
His brother might be just very stubborn.
Sorry, Steve, you want to say something?
Steve,
Why are you controlling this conversation?
because it needs
Because
control.
we're trying to arrange...
Derek was doing a fine job.
Sorry, we're trying to...
And now
Sorry?
you've taken Derek, the guy over here who stalled your sitting on.
I'm sorry. This is just like in normal circumstances at Speaker's Corner. I would normally speak on a platform, give my point of view. Today we decided, because the debate on the issue is a big issue, and Piers has been part of that debate, so I decided, yes, correct, just like you do when you speak to the camera at certain times, that we would present the discussion in a way that tries to get into some depth rather than just a generic free-for-all.
Hello, Piers. One question I have got about the climate change protests are that the week you did the protests, they were all on parliamentary recess. So if you want to speak to somebody from government, yet there is nobody in government, what's the point of doing it if there is nobody in government to speak to? No, but he was talking to a lot of people. He was talking to a lot of people who were in it, and I'm just saying, like, why?
I don't know why they do.
But the thing is, but I'm not finished with it. But of course, but the other thing to add to it was, why did it take so long for everybody for them all to basically for them to get rid of them in the first place? Because in fact they were causing so.
This is an orchestrated we would be moved off in 5 minutes. If we were on any of these bridges, blocking them up, saying end the war in Palestine, stop the war in Yemen, we'd be removed after 5 minutes. This is, well, by the police.
There are people. There's a woman by the name of Corey Morningstar. One minute. Because we're organising a specific type of discussion for the video here. Yes, I am dominating. I'm not disputing that. It's not like a typical subject. There's certain issues that need to be discussed rather than just have a chaotic discussion. That's the reason for it. It's not because I'm not trying to exclude anybody, but I think that it's easy at Speaker's Corner to get into a chaotic discussion. Sorry, one sec, just in response to what the gentleman said. A woman by the name of Corey Morningstar, the website you can find her material on, wrongkindofgreen.org. She's done a study which argues, and she's a green activist who believes in climate change, right? She's done a study that says that what's happened recently can be attributed to an orchestrated media campaign designed to mobilize opinion behind a campaign that will mobilize resources, capital unlocking, to back up a specific agenda. So an example of that is, and I'll come to you then, and then you, is that Paul Polman, he was the former CEO of Unilever. In January he resigned. He was 10 years CEO of Unilever. He declared his support for Extinction Rebellion because they launched a website a few days ago called Extinction Rebellion or xrbusiness.org. And then a lot of people in Extinction Rebellion weren't happy with it, and they took the website down. But it was announced in the Times newspaper a few days ago. Yeah. So you, and then you.
Okay. Piers, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
Take one of our leaflets.
Can you pass me one over?
Yeah. People want to know
have a couple of copies
about what I said. Best way is go to Twitter @Piers_Corbyn. And all the links have been there. I've just been shown some Twitters, which are letters from me. And I suggest they're fake Twitters.
Okay, so just for the camera, what those Twitters are,
Am I next or? Yeah. So, can I just I just want to make. I was watching the parliamentary debate on climate change, and while baking my vegan cakes, 'cause I'm a vegan activist, and Kerry McCarthy, who's a vegan MP, who asked the question. I've been sat here for 2 hours, and it's all about oil, and it's all about big business. What about the food sector? The food sector is covering most of the Earth's surface, and I don't even know because I'm not into politics, but the Tory person who was holding the meeting, who was saying, "Oh, we've had a good turnout," and there was hardly anyone there. There was maybe a quarter of the MPs were there. They've had a good turnout because of Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg, but there was hardly anyone there. Anyway, she said in response to Kerry McCarthy, "Oh yeah, I think there's technological solutions." And my feeling is that she was referring to stem cell meat and referring to stacking food up in warehouses. Now, I don't think that technological solutions is just going to debilitate the people of the planet. What we need to return to is natural systems of providing food. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I think you made some very good points here. I'm very interested in this conversation. So I would like to ask you about what do you think about the, on one side we have the shrinking of the Arctic ice, and on the other side we have the increasing of the Antarctic ice. I would like to see your point of view on that, because I think you're making some very good points, and I think you can explain that very reasonably in your way.
And you're from France? No. Oh, I think bad guess. Okay, but I support the yellow vest. I just thought I'd like to mention. You're what?
Ukrainian.
Ukrainian. Okay. Good to meet you. Right, Arctic ice. Well, currently Arctic ice is expanding as well as the Antarctic ice, but the BBC only report half the story. In terms of the glaciation, the largest glacier in Greenland and the most significant glacier in the world, the Mundsdam Glacier, I think it's called, is growing. And it's been growing for the last year or so. And this is highly significant, and the warmists don't know what to say. In terms of snow cover, the annual snow cover levels, the largest extent is measured every year. The largest extent of Northern Hemisphere snow cover this year is highest than it's been for 50 years. We are now in a world cooling period caused by low solar activity. What we call the mini ice age, the beginning of it, probably started seriously in 2013 when we had that very cold March with the jet stream a long way south. What happens in these mini ice ages is the Northern Hemisphere jet stream comes a long way south, it gets generally colder, and we do have some very warm spells, but there's less of them. And you have some extreme cold spells in winters, as have happened in North America, for example. And they all mean crop losses. Last year, and food shortages. Last mini ice age, a lot of Germans moved to Spain. So there is a climate crisis, but it's the opposite to what they claim. We should be setting up, I would say, instead of Extinction Rebellion groups, we should have Action for Life groups in every town where we demand the truth, the real truth, and take action to defend agriculture against the impending cold. Thank you.
So,
I've got quite a few, may I? Hi. Sorry, number one. Is this okay? Number one, I arrived a bit late. Your scientific credentials? Oh, sorry. What are your scientific credentials? I'm just checking. Thank you. Would you concur then when David Attenborough and James Lovelock 10 years ago stood up and showed us pictures of the North Pole shrinking, which are still online, they were mistaken, yes?
Well, it might have been true then, but it's not true now.
Well, they're still showing those pictures. Sorry. Am I not speaking? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. They're not. They may still be showing those pictures because they don't want to show the current pictures. And I have to say that David Attenborough is only where he is because he's spouting the lies he does. David Bellamy, his predecessor, was sacked the moment he spoke the truth about climate. I call him now Sir David Attenborough of Walrusgate, because what he said about walruses was untrue. He claimed the walruses are jumping off cliffs because of climate change. Nothing of the sort. They're jumping off cliffs because they're chased by polar bears, and they're also frightened by drones used by filmmakers who want to get a bit of action. So actually, filmmakers are killing walruses and blaming climate change for it.
Last question, I'll keep it brief. Sorry, it's on point. Thank you. Hi, okay, last question. Would you concur it's possible that human beings are exacerbating climate change and there are more premature deaths from energy poverty, as you claim? Those are not mutually contradictory facts, and it's possible that global organisations are trying to jump on a bandwagon to milk our taxes, yeah? So even if the second two things were true, they don't disprove the first thing necessarily. I hope you concur with that. Yes?
There's three things there, but whatever. Mankind's carbon dioxide is not affecting climate in any way. Local climates are affected by trees, and if you denude areas like the British Isles, they chop down all the trees to build the navy to beat the Armada. That did cause an amount of warming. Well, of course, many things could be simultaneously true. I agree with you. There could still be carbon dioxide effect as well as the sun ruling the show, but there is no evidence of any carbon dioxide effect. And I repeat, you missed it. We've challenged all concerned to produce scientific papers. The BBC have failed, although Roger Harrabin did email me or text me saying, yes, Piers, we have the evidence, I'll send it. Nothing arrived. I texted him back and he had some lame excuse, and he had no excuse basically, and he didn't send anything. And since we're talking of texts and emails, I'd like to say for the first time in 10 years I had a communication from Tariq Ali this morning, who is very concerned about what the global corporate activities are doing, and sent me a very supportive text. And in my opinion, we want him on board for a new Action for Life programme of action to stop this climate sect, this climate death sect called Extinction Rebellion.
Perfect, thank you. So one of my concerns with this whole conversation is the shadowy they. We keep on talking about they, big business and various other things. And as I showed you, Piers, not so long ago, like literally 5 minutes ago, I've got a tweet here that Piers retweeted. It was originally... okay. Okay.
It's a fake tweet. Right, it's a fake tweet.
Okay, so what? So Piers is denying it. The internet says otherwise, and we'll then go on to Mark Windows, who you are an associate of, and it all goes back to the they. So here he's retweeting something which says it was by someone called White Knight, I assume a white supremacist. They will force Trump into war. What do you think happened to Hitler, Bilderberg, CIA, IMF, banker gangsters? They are the problem. There's a picture of Lord Jacob Rothschild, a famous Jew, imposed over a Nazi flag, talking about the Bilderberg group. There's another which you touched on Israel-Palestine, of Netanyahu controlling ISIS with one hand and using ISIS to attack the West. And so when you talk about they and the oligarchs and who are you referring to?
Well, I have been very specific. A former chief executive of ExxonMobil is on the committee, the management board of Citizens Online. The chief of 5G oligarchs, one of the companies, the name I can't remember, but it's listed on that piece of paper I gave out, or online, is on the board of Citizens Online. Very specifically, George Soros and Bill Gates fund, which is their charity front organisation, which pays for the management of Greta Thunberg.
So is it Soros and the likes who are controlling the governments that are acting to advance this climate change narrative?
Well, Soros, look, we've done a lot of that. Soros has a very big influence. The handouts to scientists to do the bidding of these people is very clear.
But hang on, Rothschild is also there's a lot of information about these things. If we go in like Rothschild, there are Rothschilds directly financing some of these campaigns. Yes, there's a lot of evidence for that. I'll present it on the online YouTube stuff, so you can question it on that. I'll present it on there, right? However, you are right to question about they in general, but going on about this particular tweet, which has got nothing to do with the debate we're talking about, I think is meandering off into the unknown.
They've got no answers. Those people, the people that put out that tweet, well, I don't know who put out that tweet, but they cannot answer the science that we put forward. That's why they have a smear campaign.
I mean, regardless of what Piers says or doesn't say, if he's talking about one issue here, which is climate change, if we wander onto every single view, I mean, I've known Piers since 1998, and I've not.
That's why you're protecting him.
What do you want about protecting him?
Because you know what the accusation is. The accusation is anti-Semitism, and you're saying we're talking about
anti-Semitism allegations have been made.
I'm a close friend. I mean, I've worked with Richard Lindzen.
Look. The whole discussion about anti-Semitism, regardless of what you're saying about Piers, it's been thrown into the air thousands of times in the last 2 years about Jeremy Corbyn, right? Now, it's not kind of relevant because we're talking about climate change. We're not talking about anti-Semitism.
You're smearing because you're
Talking anything to do with that.
Charlton, sorry, Ross, it's not a smear.
I've told you who I'm talking about. Were you listening? Were you listening? Were you listening? No, I haven't retweeted no white supremacist anything ever. Mark Windows does many things and he can answer for himself.
Okay, guys. Let's focus on the scientific point of view. Whether somebody is or not an anti-Semite does not negate what he's talking about scientifically. Sorry? It doesn't matter. We're not talking about anti-Semitism now. I'd like to ask a question about this, about global warming and about all this stuff. Sorry. Do you think that?
It's not your debate. It's not your debate, Heiko. It's not your camera. Not your camera. Not your stool. Not your tarmac.
Let's be quite clear about this. This is my debate.
What are you talking about?
One, I'm answering you. I'm a speaker who's been speaking at Speaker's Corner. I'm a speaker who's been speaking at... You made a statement to me. I'm answering it. Yes, it's my debate. Why is it my debate? Because I organised one for 1 minute. The gentleman here is saying, is it my debate? Yes. Why is it my debate? One, I organised for Piers to come down here. Two, I discussed with the gentleman here about laying out the chairs and how we'd organise the debate. Three, I discussed with Leon about arranging this a day ago. So this is an organised debate which I organise. I normally speak at Speaker's Corner myself. I have come down here specifically to organise this debate because it's been discussed over the last 2 weeks about Extinction Rebellion. That's the subject of this meeting. Exactly. If you want to have a subject meeting about anti-Semitism, fair enough, but we're not having it here now. We're not having it here now. We are not having it here now. Sorry.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to ask you just one. Sorry, just ignore. I'd like to just ask you one question. Do you think that human development? Do you think that human? Sorry, guys, your questions will come a bit later. Let me just ask something. Do you think mankind has any ability, just in their industrialization, let's ignore warfare, any ability to influence the climate unwillingly? For example, with their development, they will ruin the climate. For example, in terms of warming or cooling or stuff like that. Not in terms of the basic pollution of the oceans. In those terms, obviously, they can influence it. But in terms of like climate. Do they have any ability of doing so, or no ability, zero?
Well, they have a small ability. The destruction of forests does change local circulation, and that is an effect on climate. Carbon dioxide produced by man has no effect on climate whatsoever. The so-called physics of back radiation denies the first and second laws of thermodynamics. And if you go onto our website, you can read about it there. And there's no scientific paper in existence which produces evidence that carbon dioxide levels change climate. The fact is the other way round.
I see. Thank you. I was trying to help you get.
Right. I think. Is there anything more you want to say?
I would. Do you want me to sum up?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so, because I was meant to be somewhere else. Okay, well, I would say, look, thank everybody for coming. I think it's been very helpful. The other things I've been accused of are irrelevant to this debate, but I'll be happy to answer them elsewhere. I will summarise. Man-made climate change does not exist. We repeat our challenge. Do you mind being quiet? We repeat our challenge that scientists or the BBC or anybody must produce evidence of man-made climate change, and I urge you to set up groups of to set up groups of of Action for Life to oppose the Extinction Rebellion view of, in fact, acting on behalf of big global corporations. But there is a wing within the Extinction Rebellion movement, if you like, which does believe in true green policies, and our gentleman here is one of them. And I support that sort of stuff, and I think we have to demand democracy in any type of these movements. And his point about, you know, mass meetings or to decide what to do when you've got a big protest is correct. So I say support true green, oppose fake green, demand accountability against diktat from on high. Thank you.
Content over everything. From your man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Well, I'll talk about what people want to talk about, which I suspect is more of this.
Anti-Semitism crisis. You're not talking about that. There we go. There he was. And this is what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened. Why? You talk about Rothschilds. You talk about Soros. And that's the subject's finished. The subject finished.